If you're interested in keeping a reading journal where you write down your thoughts about the books that you read so that you don't forget what you thought of them, but you don't have a lot of time to spend on it, or maybe you just don't want to spend a lot of money on stickers and washi tape the way that I keep a reading journal, this video is for you. Today I'm sharing 3 different ways you can keep review pages in a reading journal, whether you have a lot to say about the books you read or just a little bit, and I'm also including grid spacing measurements so you can exactly copy these layouts if you'd like to for your own reading adventures. Hi, I'm Erin, thanks for clicking on my video. And just as a little disclaimer, these don't need to be in a reading journal necessarily. You can keep pages like this in your ordinary bullet journal too, and just have everything together in one notebook. This first setup actually has 2 books to a page, so it's a very efficient space-saving version. And just to mention, I'm using an A5 journal here, so if you're using a different size journal to track your reading and keep track of your reviews, then you might need to adapt the grid spacing to fit your journal. This one's kind of a 2-part setup, so you have 2 columns for each of your books. There's a column on the left side where you write any information about the book. You have a book cover if you'd like to include that kind of thing. You can put format and any other details you like to track. And in the bigger box, you write your review. I'll set up an example so you can see exactly what I mean there, but for now, let's set this up again on the opposite page and I'll add the grid spacing numbers to this one, so if you want to copy this design, you can do that really easily. You also don't have to use a ruler. I'm kind of just doing it for demonstration purposes, but this process does go much more quickly if you do these lines freehand, so more things to keep in mind to speed up the process. The left column of these sections is 8 spaces wide and 24 dot grid spaces all the way across the page from left to right of the whole box, because I've left a blank space on the left side and on the right side of each one of these rectangles. That means the right column would be 16 dot grid spaces from left to right. I don't know if I wrote that down or not. And then the vertical space is 17 dot grid spaces from top to bottom. Again, I've left a dot grid space blank at the top of the page. I just like the way this little bit of a margin looks, but if you wanted to use up maximum page space, then if you just don't leave that dot grid space at the top, at the left and the right, you'll have a little bit more room to add your reviews. I've left 2 dot grid spaces between the top box and the bottom box. The bottom box just has the exact same dimensions as the one at the top. The lines I'm drawing at the moment are where we're going to put the book cover. You don't have to include a book cover in your review, it's just something that I like to do. I like a little bit of visual interest. But if you prefer to keep more data here instead, that's totally valid too. I have this handy little star rating stamp that I love. I usually just color it in with a marker and stamp it really quickly while that ink is still dry, but you could also use this with stamp pads if you prefer. And this space underneath is where I will also write the name of the book. You don't have to double up on that if you think having it printed in the book cover is enough. That's totally fair. My eyes are getting old, I'm approaching 40, and I find it easier to be able to read this way, but you could also include dates that you read it, the format you read it in, the genre, page count, any other kind of book information that you like to track, you can include in that section. Then your review goes in the bigger space over on the right side. You can write anything at all about the book that you think you might like to remember in the review space, but sometimes it's hard to come up with things, so I thought I'd give you a few ideas, a few little prompts about things that you might want to write about. Your favorite or least favorite character can be a good place to start, or your favorite or least favorite scenes or moments or quotes. You could note down whether you read the book quickly or slowly, or if you found that you stopped and started a lot, because that might reflect on your enjoyment of the book. Could you envision yourself reading this book again in the future? Do you think it's good enough to warrant a reread? Would you recommend it to a friend if they were looking for something to read? That's a good one. How did the book make you feel? Did you laugh? Did you cry? Were you frustrated with it? Were you happy? Were you satisfied with the ending? Was everything tied up and answered that you wanted to be? Did they leave anything open for your interpretation? Was there anything about the story that surprised you? Or on the flip side, if it's something like a mystery, did you pick what the twist was going to be or who the killer was going to be early on? If the book was part of a series, will you read the next book in the series? Are you interested enough to continue the story? These are good starting points for fiction books, but if you're reading non-fiction or you're just looking for some more inspiration, there are lots of really wonderful book club resources out there that have lists of questions that you can use for discussion prompts. I think they work really well as reading journal prompts as well. I pre-printed a lot of book covers as examples to use for this video and for another video that I made about reading journaling as well. I sized them specifically to match with the dot grid so that these ones would be 7 dot grid spaces tall and 5 dot grid spaces wide. Most dot grid journals have 5mm spacing between the dots, which means that 7 dot grid spaces tall is 3.5 centimeters and 5 dot grid spaces wide is 2.5 centimeters. So you can size things really easily in Microsoft Word and then just print them out from there. I just saved them from Goodreads. And I like to print them on sticker paper so it's really easy to get them into the journal, but just normal paper and cutting them out and gluing it in will work really well too. I'm adding the title of each of my books with these letter stamps. It is quite time consuming. I really enjoy the process, but I have some friends who've tried doing this in their reading journals and did not enjoy, so proceed at your own risk. Of course, you can just write the title of the book with a pen instead if you prefer. I am doing that with the other details. I've added my star rating stamp underneath the heading and left a bit of space to put the author's name. And just for my own enjoyment, I just like knowing a little bit about how I consumed the book when I look back. I like to note down the format, so audiobook, ebook, if I got it through the library, if I read it on paperback, and also the dates that it took me to read the book. And then my review goes in the space that's left on the right side. The setups I'm showing you in this video are just for example. This is not my actual reading journal, but these are books that I have actually read, so my tiny reviews here are actual reviews of the book, so don't read them if you don't want spoilers. Also, I have used this exact setup in my own reading journal so many times in the past, so here's a little example. These ones have got very organic hand-drawn lines that were just freehanded without a ruler, so that gives you an example of how that can look. It's very fuss-free, it takes almost no time, and it still looks really cute when it's done. Let's move on to our second review layout. This one's actually very similar, but maybe designed for someone who has a lot more to say about the book and needs more than just half a page at a time. I really like putting things in boxes. I feel like that just makes things look very organized. Maybe it's because I'm very much a decoration kind of a person, so if I don't at least have a line on the page, I feel like I haven't done enough. But if you don't like to put things in boxes, you absolutely don't need to. You could do this stuff without boxes and be totally free. So we're basically doing the same setup as we did on the previous page, as though the lower box doesn't exist and the top box just continues all the way down the page. So we still have that smaller column in the top left corner, except this time it only goes to the halfway point of the page and it stops, and the space underneath is really open. This way you still have your dedicated area for the book cover and any stats or other things that you might like to track about the book, the format, the dates that you read it, how many pages it has, etc., etc. But you also have double the amount of space to add your thoughts and feelings about the book. Again, this is a layout I have used myself in the past to great effect. So we have our little box, it's going to be 8 spaces wide again, just like it was on the previous page. This time I'm making it 18 spaces tall, which is a little bit taller because we aren't limited by trying to fit 2 reviews on the one page. We can bring it a little bit closer to that center line. Once again, I've left one dot grid space blank at the top on the left and the right side, and I've also left one blank at the very bottom of the page. So the overall box width is 24 dot grid spaces. If you wanted to extend this information column all the way to the bottom of the page, you could absolutely do that. It's actually a really good way to accommodate something like the Corpal rating system. If you're using a specific rating system that you want to keep track of all of the elements there, that could be a good way to do it. Here's a little example of how this page would look once it's all filled in using Iron Flame, and once again, this is an actual review, so please don't read it if you don't want spoilers. And for even more examples, here are some times I've used this exact layout in my own reading journal in 2023. Much wigglier lines on these ones because I didn't use a ruler, I was just trying to make it as quick as I could. You might notice I'm doing a lot more of the full page reviews than the smaller half page reviews. I started out with the half page reviews and then I started to realize I had a lot to say about books, so I kind of graduated to this one. I've got one more review page idea to show you, and this one is great if you prefer a larger print of the book cover, especially if you have one of these mini printers like the HP Sprocket or the Canon Ivy. You can just print your book cover with your mini printer and you don't have to fuss around with sizing anything specifically. I actually use the HP Sprocket for smaller book covers as well. I use its collage feature, and I have a short about that in case you'd like to find out more. I have it linked in the description for you. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone with this one and not draw any boxes on the page before we start, but I will draw a box on the right page so I can show you where the book cover goes in a kind of demonstrative way. The print sizes for a mini printer like this don't change, so it's not really a variable, which means I don't feel like I need to tell you dot grid spaces for this layout because I don't feel like they're really relevant. But if you are not using one of these printers and you want to size your print to something about the same, here is what it measures out to just in case. It's about 10 dot grid spaces wide by 15.5 dot grid spaces tall. I'm going to be using the space on the right side of this image, and I'm just going from a couple of dots over from the edge of the picture, and I'm highlighting highlighting every second row here, partially just as demonstration, but I will actually be doing that on the other page as well. And this is where I'm going to put all of that fun information, the title and the author's name, if you like, because that will also be in your much larger print this time. The format that you read it in, the page count, the genre, the book's original publication date can be a really fun one to have a record of, the date that you started reading, the date that you finished reading, a star rating, anything else that you might like to have some records of can go in this space. So this is a really fun option if you are, like me, a bit of a data nerd. Then you have all of the rest of the page underneath, which is a little bit more than half the page, available to add your review. And I have once again left one dot grid space at the top and on the left side of the printed photo there, so there's a little bit of breathing room, and I like to leave a little bit of space underneath as well before I start the review so that things just have a little bit of room to breathe. I wanted to take a second to rave about my star rating stamp. I love it so much. I bought this one on Etsy and it was pretty expensive to get it to me in Australia from Germany, but since then so many star rating stamp options have become available. There are lots of them available with lots of different stationery companies, and some of them are bigger places and some of them are smaller places. You can also get star rating stickers if that's more your style. You can get chili stickers if you're into spicy books and you want to keep track of the spiciness of the books you were reading. I know some people don't like to rate their books at all, so please don't feel like you have to include this. And of course, if you do want to include star ratings but you don't want any extra stuff, you can just draw your own stars and colour them in yourself. It's a very valid way to do things too. I also use my reading journal concurrently with two different reading tracking apps, Goodreads, which I think is the really well-known one, and Storygraph, which is the new up-and-comer that has really wonderful features for tracking your reading, so that definitely helps me keep an eye on these things. I don't have to write down somewhere these starting and finishing dates because I can just track that stuff with the app, and it also gives you some really fun statistics, so I really enjoy using Storygraph for my end-of-month wrap-ups of kind of average ratings across all the books I read in the month, or across 6 months, or across a year, or whatever it is. Genre details, that kind of thing. It's much easier when you have the app to rely on for these things, even page count. I also like to keep track of which books I accessed via the library, which is most of them for me, and which books I read that I actually paid for, whether I bought a physical copy or an ebook or bought the audiobook or something like that. That's my favorite stat to track lately, I think. I've only been doing that recently, but I really enjoy seeing how many books I didn't have to spend money to read. Also, just as an extra little fourth option, if you prefer the look of the larger book cover, but you wanted to stick to having 2 reviews to a page and a little bit less review writing space, then you can just add your bigger book cover and the review next to it, make that first column a little bit wider, and there you go, that's a fourth option as well. I actually think this one might be the quickest to set up because there is no ruling or drawing of lines. It's just very straight to the point. I think it looks great, and technically there's a little bit of space there where you could add in some stickers in the corners if you wanted to, and some washi tape, because you know I'm into that. Here's a little flip through of all 3 layout ideas side by side. Let me know if one of them resonates with you and if you think you might start using one of these in your own reading reviewing pursuits. If you'd like to stick around and see more from me, I make a monthly everything I read this month plus setting up some tracking pages for next month reading journal video, so I have a whole playlist of those. If you'd like to see, I'll pop that up on the screen for you here. As well as another video I made recently kind of similar to this one, but this one is all about different ideas for tracking your reading over the course of a longer term, like a year. Thanks for watching!